And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and we got a new set to talk about here. Of course, Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And these are the cards that we are all going to be playing, in my opinion. And of course, what do I mean by that? I mean, they're going to be the commander staples, right? They're going to be the cards that, for the most part, people are going to be shoehorning into their commander decks. I got 20 cards to talk about here, all right? So let's get right to it. Starting out with the lands, Volatile Fault. This is a land cave, which is a new land type from this set. And if there is anything you're doing in your deck that might reference a land type, not a basic land type, of course, because this is non-basic lands, but anything that's referencing land types, I can't think of one off the top of my head. You might have some workarounds here with the whole cave thing. I don't know, maybe not. So, taps to add a Colorless, which, for any utility land is fine. It doesn't enter the battlefield tapped, right? Pay 1, tap, sacrifice it, destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. That player may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. You create a treasure token. So this is just another option. And as I say all the time, you absolutely need that land destruction in your commander decks, right? Not the mass land destruction, just my opponent has a coffers, a cradle, a whatever. I got to get it off the table or it's just game over. You have to have answers. And this is a great option. The land options, ironically enough, are always the easiest options to shoehorn into your deck for dealing with other lands. There's lots of them. This is another great option. So you got to pay the 1, which means it's not as good as a Ghost Quarter. Maybe not, because you also get the treasure token, right? So for some people, I mean, obviously even a treasure token theme, I probably would take out a Ghost Quarter to put this in. But every deck needs at least one of these options, maybe 2. And in fact, in a lot of my monocolor decks now, I am putting 2 options for this, and so for that reason, I might end up adding this to a couple of my decks. It's certainly a card that can see play in the format. Let's talk about the land cycle here, the Restless, fill in the blank. They are enter the battlefield tap lands that are adding 2 colors, and of course, there's lots of variations of lands in the format that, everyone has their preferences. It enters the battlefield tapped, and it gives you the 2 colors that you probably need in your 2-color deck, and then gives you some other utility, right? The Temple series, which they reprinted in this set, enters the battlefield tapped, gives you the 2 colors you probably need in your 2-color deck, and then scry 1. That land series I've always liked and I've always used, and I am starting to consider pushing it away because there's just more and more lands that do other stuff that can be really good, like this series. This one, these lands turn into creatures, which can be good for a variety of reasons, but also they have attack triggers. For example, this one, Restless Prairie, whenever it attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. That can be pretty darn good later in a game, right? That's the kind of stuff that I like to look for on these utility lands, is either I'm dealing with an issue like those, destroying my opponent's lands or graveyard hate or something, or it's going to help me close out the game, which this one certainly will. This is a really nice thing to have later in a game. 4 mana to turn this into a creature, no big deal. I got lots of mana. I just need some help closing out the game, and this will do that. So you might want to look at this land cycle, see if it can fit in some of your decks. I literally just did a video about underrated lands in the format, and it's so easy to shoehorn these utility lands into your deck, and especially for one that adds 2 colors, it could be extra easy. Last land I'm going to be talking about, and this is one that I'm particularly excited about, Pit of Offerings, and it is, again, a cave. This one enters the battlefield tapped, taps to add that Colorless, but when it enters the battlefield, exile up to 3 target cards from graveyards. And that can be, again, like I say, I talk about this in my 6 things video, 6 things every commander deck needs. You need to have land destruction, again, but you also need to have graveyard hate. And this is not the greatest graveyard hate option ever. Here, you're only going to get 3 cards, but you can get some good ones, right? You can really get the ones that you're worried about. Maybe the big creature they're going to reanimate. Maybe it's the flashback card in their graveyard, something like that. So it can be good there, but this can also be just a really great mana fixing option in the format. You can exile cards from your graveyard. Why would you want to do that? Because you can tap this to add 1 mana of the exiled card's colors. So if I play this maybe turn 3 or 4 and I got a few cards in my graveyard, again, this is exile up to 3 target cards from graveyard. So I can hit my opponents and I can hit myself. So I can hit my opponents and get those cards out of their graveyard that I don't want them to have. And then this will also add those colors of mana. And if I got those colors, that's great. But if I just want the colors that I want, right, you can put this in a 3-color deck and fix in all 3 colors that you need. This is essentially tap, add any color I need in my deck. So I think this is a great land. This is definitely going to go in a few of my decks. Not only is it graveyard hate, but it also can fix you in a whole bunch of colors, possibly all the colors you need. All right, getting to the non-land options here. Get Lost, 1 and a white, instant, destroy target creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. Its controller creates 2 map tokens, and not that we need it anymore. Great mono white removal, but this is another option. And honestly, I'm getting to the point now where, am I going to start taking swords out of my mono white decks? Not, black white decks or red white decks, just my mono white decks, for which I have 2. I'm starting to consider taking out Path and Swords because I really like versatile removal. They are the most efficient removal spells in the entire game of Magic, but just a removal spell that only hits creatures is starting to get to the point where I can't afford to put that in my deck because I want to put this in there. It's only 2 mana. It's only 1 more, and I'm also hitting enchantments and planeswalkers. The controller gets 2 map tokens. What does that do? They're artifacts with pay 1 and tap, sacrifice this artifact, target creature you control explores. Okay. I mean, it's okay. So if I give my opponent 2 map tokens, they can now explore with a couple of their creatures and maybe put a counter on them. It's very minimal value, in my opinion. And the big thing that I like about this a lot, and I've been talking recently about Fateful Absence being, again, that's a card where I'm like, okay, I can't find room for that either. This is also hitting enchantments, right? That's only hitting creatures and planeswalkers. The fact that this hits enchantments is what makes me want to find room for it in my decks. Because as I say all the time, it is likely in a commander game that I'm probably going to want to hit the enchantments over even the creatures. There's so many really, really powerful and really annoying enchantments, right? You just think about the Rhystic Studies and the Smothering Tithes that I absolutely have to get off the table because they're just super good, also super annoying. Then you think about the enchantments like maybe the Rest in Peace that is absolutely hosing my deck, right? There's lots of those enchantments as well. The Staxy enchantments, there's lots of enchantments that, man, I just got to get it off the table right now. And having a removal option that can do that is really, really important. This is definitely a card that's going to see play in the format, and it's up there. It's definitely up there as far as the best removal in mono white right now, I think. All right, Unstable Glyph Bridge, and I'll just say there's a lot of mono white cards on this list. Man, we got a lot of great ones, and again, the stuff like Get Lost, the removal that I'm going to have to find room for, on top of the stuff that maybe it fits the theme of what I'm doing as well. So, Unstable Glyph Bridge, 3 white artifact. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, which is important, for each player, choose a creature with power 2 or less that player controls, then destroy all creatures except the creature's chosen this way. So it's a board wipe. This is a board wipe on an artifact. Now, of course, you have to cast it. No blinking, recursion, anything like that will work here. This has to be cast, right? So I cast it for each player, myself included. So if I'm in a deck where I have a commander that is power 2 or less, this seems like a fantastic option. Like I say all the time, mono white has so many great options for board wipes that when I'm choosing my board wipes, I want the ones that advantage me. And if I'm in a deck where my commander is power 2 or less, this is certainly one that advantages me. And I get to choose for my opponents, right? And guess what? For each player, choose a creature with power 2 or less. If they don't have one, they get nothing. They don't have a creature with power 2 or less, so they don't get to keep anything. If all their creatures are big, they get nothing. And if they have a Saproling token, they can keep that, right? Because I get to choose. This is a pretty fantastic. I mean, again, every set we get another fantastic white board wipe. This is a pretty fantastic option, I think. Again, if it fits the theme of what you're doing, maybe you're doing an artifact theme and it fits your theme. We got more though. It also has this new mechanic, and funny enough how I ended up picking a lot of cards that have these new mechanics that I get to talk about. Craft with artifact, 3 white. And what does that mean? Well, it means you pay 3 white and exile this artifact, so this card, and exile another artifact you control or an artifact from your graveyard. That's not very hard to do. You already have the mana rocks. It's things you would typically have in any commander game, but also on top of that, you can just take one out of your graveyard if you're in that artifact theme, right? Then you return this card transformed under owner's control, craft only as a sorcery, and the backside is Sand Swirl, Wanderglyph, artifact creature golem 5/3 with flying. Again, might particularly fit certain themes here. Whenever an opponent casts a spell during their turn, they can't attack you or planeswalkers you control this turn. Whenever an opponent casts a spell during their turn, hey, wait a minute, that's like every turn, right? That's also pretty fantastic. Each opponent who attacked you or a planeswalker you control this turn can't cast spells. So that's awesome as well. And particularly later in the game, right? That's a card where, yeah, I cast this and it's a damn decent board wipe in a lot of situations. And then later on, I mean, I guess someone can remove this, but I'm not sure what. I guess they would be worried about the backside. That's why they might remove it. But I could craft with Artifact later on. And now this turns into, it's going to make it very difficult for my opponents to attack me. They won't be able to cast a spell if they do. Fantastic. Really great card. Definitely, I might have to find room for this in some decks. All right, moving on to another mono white card. Like I said, there's a bunch on this list. Dauntless Dismantler, 1 and a white, Human Artificer, 1/4. Artifacts your opponent's control into the battlefield tapped. That's always great. And of course, we're always talking about the mana rocks, which we have lots of in Commander games. That Soul Ring, that Arcane Signet, they're going to enter the battlefield tap so your opponents can't use them right away. But also treasure tokens. That's the big one here. I mean, I guess mana rocks is the big one, but treasure tokens as well is really, really big. Some people might not know this. Treasure tokens have to tap in order for you to use them. That's why you have these cards that say create a tapped treasure token, because you can't use them right away. You have to tap them to use them. So this will not allow your opponent to cast their Dockside Extortionist and then just immediately go off. All those treasure tokens they just created will enter the battlefield tapped. They won't be able to use them right away. That's great. But also there's more. Pay XX and a white. Sacrifice Dauntless Dismantler. Destroy each artifact with mana value X. That's also fantastic. And again, in that treasure token situation, of course, the mana value there is 0. So we just pay 1 white mana to destroy each artifact token. I mean, you'll also get the mana crypts as well, right? But just pay 1 white mana to destroy all the artifact tokens on the battlefield is fantastic. The treasure tokens, the clue tokens, blood tokens, map tokens as well, I guess. This is a fantastic card. Again, what theme does this fit? I don't know if it necessarily fits a theme. It's just a really great card in any commander deck. In any commander game, you're going to love having this guy. All right, getting to a mono red card, Bone Horde Dracosaur. This is definitely a card that's going to see play in the format without question. 3 red, dinosaur dragon 5/5. And I'll just say the fact that they made this a dinosaur and dragon is, I think, going to make it likely this card will be pretty expensive. The fact that they made it those 2 really popular creature types is only going to make it way worse. It's going to go on the dragon decks and it's going to also go on the dinosaur decks, right? So it's got flying and first strike, 5/5 flying first strike, not bad. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. And again, the wording there is play, which means if we exile a land, we can play it. If you exiled a land card this way, create a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token. If you exiled a non-land card this way, create a treasure token. Just phenomenal value here. So I get to exile the top 2 cards. So I'm already doing the impulse draw thing where I can play those cards. That's always great value, right? But if I exile a land card, I get a 3/1 red dinosaur token. And if I exile a non-land card, I get a treasure token. So even more value. Really, really great value-y card. Fits in the dinosaur themes, fits in the dragon theme. I guess fits in the dinosaur theme more because you're making a dinosaur token, and also fits in the, I guess you could put it in a treasure token deck. You could put it in the impulse draw deck. You could put it in the I play my stuff from exile deck, for which there's a bunch of those. This is going to be, I'm guessing this is going to be a pricey card. I think it's going to go in a lot of decks and people are going to be going after it for sure. All right, let's talk about Dino DNA. This is actually a Jurassic Park card. I thought I would throw this one on the list just to, again, I like to mix it up a bit so we can reference all the different things here. This is from the Jurassic Park Universes Beyond, the crossover stuff, as you could probably tell from the picture. It is a 1 mana artifact and has imprint. Pay 1 and tap, exile target creature card from a graveyard. Activate only as a sorcery, right? So we're getting this from anyone's graveyard. You can pay 6, create a token that's a copy of target creature card exiled with Dino DNA, except it's a 6/6 green dinosaur creature token with trample. Activate only as a sorcery. So just a fantastic ability that you can do so much with. I mean, again, I'll just throw out, if you're in the dinosaur tribal deck, you can now turn any creature into a dinosaur. You can also just make big dinosaur tokens if you want to be doing that. Great way to use your mana later in a game. If I'm in that Zerta deck, I'll just throw out a few options here. I'm in a Zerta deck. This is an activated ability that will now cost 2 less and only cost me 4 to activate. So there's that. Probably the neatest way to use this is, again, I'll bring up the Cold-Eyed Selkie scenario where I have that creature that I really want it to be bigger, right? There's a creature that it's a 1/1. It deals that much damage to draw that much cards. Now I can make a 6/6, right? I can exile that from my graveyard or someone else's, and I can make a 6/6 version of that Cold-Eyed Selkie that's going to draw me 6 cards when it connects. So there's just a lot of really neat ways to use this card. It's certainly an interesting one. All right, Zoyawa's Justice, 1 in a red instant. The owner of target artifact or creature with mana value 1 or greater shuffles it into their library. Then that player discovers X, where X is its mana value. So, of course, very similar wording here, all that kind of stuff. Definitely a similar theme that we've seen in mono red, and I'm sure this card's getting a little bit of buzz. 2 mana instant, the owner of target artifact or creature with mana value 1 or greater. Can't get any tokens here. Anything that's mana value 0, I guess you can't get. I guess you can't hit your opponent's artifact land with this. So you can only get big stuff that's mana value 1 or greater. That's not entirely bad. I guess the reason why is because then that person would discover 0, and so they wouldn't get anything. So that's probably why they worded it that way. But it's not bad. It's definitely a good thing for you. So it's doing a very similar to a Chaos Warp thing. However, it's only artifacts and creatures. That's the part about this that I don't love. And for that reason, I likely won't be using this in any of my decks. Even my mono red deck, I think I probably won't play this because red deals with artifacts and creatures pretty well. That's the part I don't love about it. If it was any permanent or non-land permanent, I would be much more apt to use it. They get to discover X. There is the, scenario just like with Chaos Warp where they end up getting the exact same thing that they shuffled into their library, which would be funny. It's okay. It's certainly, we'll see play in the format. Again, for me, I don't love it just because it only hits artifacts and creatures, and red already does that pretty well. All right, let's talk about another mono white card, Charismatic Conqueror. 1 in a white vampiric soldier, 2/2 with vigilance. Whenever an artifact or creature enters the battlefield untapped and under an opponent's control, they may tap that permanent. If they don't, you create a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. What a fantastic card. Just such fantastic value. And I guess you wouldn't want to play this with that Dauntless Dismantler because that's going to make your opponent's stuff enter the battlefield tapped, and then this won't trigger, right? Whenever an artifact or creature enters the battlefield untapped. And how often are your opponent's artifacts or creatures entering the battlefield untapped? Like that's constantly, right? You just wouldn't want to combine this with something that's already doing that because then it would shut it off. This is incredible value, right? Again, let's just go straight to the treasure token theme. My opponent plays a Dockside Extortionist. They get 10 treasure tokens off of it. Those are artifacts entering the battlefield untapped under an opponent's control. They may tap that permanent, so they can tap all their treasure tokens. So now I'm in that situation. Now I'm in a situation where I'm just forcing them to tap all their treasure tokens. That's great. If they don't, now I'm going to get a bunch of 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink. This is not trigger only once each turn, do this only once each turn. This is, my opponent has a zillion things enter the battlefield. They have to tap all of them. If they don't, I will get vampire tokens. So the bottom here sort of for this is my opponent's artifacts and creatures enter the battlefield tapped, essentially. But there's going to be the guy, just like there's the guy who doesn't play for the Smothering Tithe, just like there's the guy who doesn't pay for the Rhystic Study, there's going to be the guy who plays his Arcane Signet and he doesn't want to tap it, so he's going to give you a vampire token with lifelink. Just fantastic value. But on top of that, of course, fits in the vampire theme, maybe the soldier theme, maybe, but obviously extra good in the vampire theme and extra good, I think, probably in a life gain deck where, those vampire tokens have lifelink. Very, very easy to get life gain triggers. Again, I have my mono white life gain deck where I want those life gain triggers. Pretty easy to get it when you're kicking out those vampire tokens with lifelink all the time. So might have to find room for that in that deck. Great card in a lot of decks. All right, moving on to March of the Canonized, another mono white card. Like I said, I got a bunch on here. X white enchantment. When March of the Canonized enters the battlefield, create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink. At the beginning of your upkeep, if your devotion to white and black is 7 or greater, create a 4/3 white and black vampire demon creature token with flying. Wow. So obviously I can X, and X spells are great in Commander because, again, early in the game, you can just play a white and a white for this. That's it, right? You don't have to pay an X at all. Don't create any vampire tokens. Funny enough, the vampire token part doesn't help well, I guess they're both vampires, but you know what I mean? The 1/1 tokens have nothing to do with the 4/3 tokens. If you're in a token theme, and again, I got a Benny Brax deck. This seems pretty good there because we have not 1 but 2 abilities that are making tokens. But if we get away from that first ability, again, later in the game, I got 7 mana. I draw this off the top. I can create a bunch of vampire tokens. They're also gaining life. That's great. But at the beginning of your upkeep, if your devotion to white and black is 7 or greater, create a 4/3. That's pretty good, right? And if you're in a white-black deck, this card alone is giving you 2 white pips. And let's say your commander gives you 3. That's 5 already. You only need 2 more, and you'll start cranking out a 4/3 token every turn. That seems pretty darn good. And again, I just love these passive effects, these enchantments. Typically, you see enchantments doing stuff like this. They just sit on the battlefield, and they just give you value every single turn. I love cards like that. All right, let's move on to... That's right, another mono white card, Redemption Choir, 2 white vampire cleric, 3/3 with lifelink. By the way, if you have a vampire deck that has white, oh boy, good luck trying to find all the room for. I mean, you probably already have a ton of support. Merfolk tribal, dinosaur tribal, vampire tribal, and of course, pirate tribal. Those are the big tribes from this set. So if you got any of those decks, you're certainly going to have lots of cards to fit in those decks. So a 3/3 with lifelink and has the Coven ability. Funny enough, they're revisiting that. Whenever Redemption Choir enters the battlefield or attacks, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, of course, we've all seen that ability before on Sun Titan, a very popular card in the format, although I would say a lot less popular than it used to be. Again, it used to be one of those cards that was just an auto-include in every white deck. Just great value. It is ramp, right? Because, of course, mana value 3 or less means you can get a land back if you got one in there, right? And the same goes for this guy, and this guy's only 4 mana. So the part about Sun Titan where it's a 6/6 and it's got, you don't really care about that, right? People play Sun Titan for, I'm getting stuff out of my graveyard. So the fact that this guy's only a 3/3 doesn't matter at all. The fact that it's lifelink, okay, fine, that's great. It's the ability that matters. That's why people play cards like this. This is a 4 mana value Sun Titan, but of course, you need that Coven. So where does this stack up? I don't know. If I'm in a vampire or cleric deck, this is certainly a better option, and I would probably likely find room for it. I've never used the Coven ability. How difficult is it? You guys let me know. Maybe I'm overvaluing this card. I don't know. It seems like, I don't want to say it's a better Sun Titan. I mean, Sun Titan costs 6. That's kind of a lot. Like 4 is a really nice number. That is like, okay, I can get this out on turn 4. How much better is this in Sun Titan, or is it at all? I don't know. Again, I'm not sure how, if you're in a creature heavy deck, that 3 or more creatures with different powers shouldn't be too difficult. Is it difficult? You guys let me know. All right, let's talk about some black cards. The Grim Captain's Locker, 3 and a black, legendary artifact. Tap Surveil 1. That's it. You just tap it to Surveil 1. That's handy in a lot of decks. Of course, you're going to look at the top card of your library. You can put it in your graveyard if you want to. And I know people will say, okay, that's great in a graveyard strategy, and it is. But also, it is really good just to look at the top card of your library and, oh, it's a land. I don't want that. Get rid of it. I don't plan on ever getting it back. I'm not playing a graveyard strategy. It just gets some crap off the top of my library that I don't want. This last ability, though, is pretty darn good. So you tap it until end of turn. Each creature in your graveyard gains escape 3 and a black, exile 4 other cards from your graveyard. That seems pretty darn good. Man, if I got some big creatures, maybe even if I got just an expensive commander. My commander costs like 8 mana. I just let it go to the graveyard, and then I can use this to just pay for and exile 4 cards from my graveyard to get it back. That seems pretty good. I mean, this is a bit of a tough one. I got to be honest. This is one that when I saw it, I was like, oh, okay, whatever. It's only going to go in surveil decks or escape decks. So wait a minute. I could put this in any deck. It's just great value. Any creature in my graveyard. Now I can just tap this. And, you know, even this is each creature. So I tap it and I got 3 creatures in my graveyard if I got enough mana that I can all get back at once if I want to. Is this played in a graveyard deck? Like, I guess I can have this out on turn 4 and just surveil. And again, just get the stuff off the top of my library I don't want. And then later in the game, just start getting back all those creatures that I want. My commander dies. I don't want to pay the commander tax. Let it go to the graveyard. Get it back for only 4 mana. Seems pretty good, I think. Let's talk about Broadside Bombardiers. I like this one a lot. 2 and a red, Goblin Pirate 2/2, Menace and Haste. And of course, whenever we see Menace and Haste on a card, that guarantees it has some sort of attack trigger, possibly a deal damage trigger. So it has Boast. And of course, we actually kind of surprised they're revisiting that ability. Haven't seen that since Kaldheim, I guess, is where we originally got it, right? Sacrifice another creature or artifact. Broadside Bombardiers deals damage equal to 2 plus the sacrifice permanent's mana cost to any target. So that's not actually an attack trigger. Like it says, activate only if this creature attacked this turn and only once each turn. So you can activate it, you know, after they attack at any point on your turn. So it's not necessarily attack trigger, but obviously you have to have your creature attack in order to do it. And man, I really like this ability, and I think it fits in a ton of decks. I mean, it is a goblin and a pirate, so I guess it could fit in goblin and pirate decks. It probably could fit in any deck. Sacrifice another creature or artifact, Every deck has creatures or artifacts. Even enchantment tribal decks have creatures and artifacts. And it deals damage equal to 2 plus the sacrifice permanent's mana value to any target. Like if your opponent has a creature on the battlefield that you just really got to get rid of, hey, I'll sacrifice my arcane signet to deal it 4 damage. That seems totally worth it to me, right? But of course, it gets much, much better if you're in any theme that is already sacrificing stuff, right? Whether it be creatures or artifacts. Again, if I just have treasure tokens lying around, now I can attack with this guy. It's going to deal 2 damage plus a sacrifice permanent's mana value. Well, of course, that's 0, but it's 2 plus 0, which is 2. So I can just sacrifice a treasure token to deal 2 damage to a target. That alone seems pretty good. This guy's only 3 mana, has haste, can attack right away. He's got the menace. Seems pretty darn good, I think, in a lot of decks. All right, getting back to the white cards. Bronze Beak Foragers. 3 and a white dinosaur, 3/4. When Bronze Beak Foragers enters the battlefield, for each opponent, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent that player controls until Bronze Beak Forager leaves the battlefield. So, of course, we've seen this ability before. This is Grasp of Fate, essentially. However, it's better than Grasp of Fate, in my opinion. Okay, and I know a lot of people might say it's worse than Grasp of Fate because Grasp of Fate only costs 3, and enchantments are typically harder to remove than creatures, so it's a lot easier for your opponent to get your Bronze Beak Foragers off the battlefield. And as I've talked about in prior videos, the reason I don't love Grasp of Fate is because you play it, you hit the best thing from each of your opponents, right? I got your Rhystic Study, I got your Smothering Tithe, I got your whatever, your best creature, your Vorinclex or something. Now every single opponent is invested in getting that Grasp of Fate off the battlefield. Automatically a 3v1, maybe a 3v1 in the game. You've now made yourself a target by hitting everyone's best thing. But at the very least, your Grasp of Fate is 3 people trying to get off the battlefield as quickly as they can. That's why I don't like that card, and that's why I don't play it. However, this has another option here. X and a white, put target card with mana value X, exiled with Bronze Beak Forager into its owner's graveyard, you gain X life. So now we have an option to get rid of it. If our opponent has that Rhystic Study, we can get it off the battlefield temporarily, and then maybe on our next turn, we pay 4 mana, dump it into their graveyard so they can't get it back, and we also gain 3 life on top of that. So I don't know. Again, this is a card where it's a little, I think it's neat. It's really interesting. You know, it's funny because I don't like Grasp of Fate, but I like this. If you really like Grasp of Fate, you must love this. I guess it's a dinosaur. It goes in the dinosaur decks. Sure, white doesn't need the removal. I already talked about great white removal in this video and finding room for it. It is gaining life. Do you want to put this in a deck where maybe you need life gain triggers? Again, it does fit in a couple different strategies outside of the fact that I think it could go in any deck and it's a pretty good fit. I think it's certainly a neat option in a commander game for dealing with your opponent's stuff temporarily or possibly even more than temporarily. All right, the last mono white card I'm going to talk about, I promise. Thousand Moon Smithy, 2 white legendary artifact. When Thousand Moon Smithy enters the battlefield, create a white gnome soldier artifact creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures you control. So, I think people will look at this and say, okay, artifact theme, I guess. No, I think you could put this in any deck. I think you could put this in any deck. And again, everyone's got mana rocks. Everyone's got creatures. He counts himself and he counts this artifact at the very least. So if you have nothing else, your gnome soldier is a 2/2. But then also, again, I got my arcane signet. I got my soul ring. Now it's a 4/4. I got a couple other creatures. Now it's a 6/6. It's going to be pretty big, right? So that alone, not bad. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you may tap 5 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control if you do transform it. So the situation I just described there, you tap 5 untapped artifacts. That includes this. So you already have 2. You already have this and the token that you just made. So you only need 3 others. That's not very hard to do at all. What happens when it flips over? It becomes a land, Barracks of the Thousand, a legendary artifact land, which is interesting. Might be the first legendary artifact land we've ever had, actually. Taps that a white. Okay, great. However, whenever you cast an artifact or creature spell using mana produced by Barracks of the Thousand, create a white gnome soldier artifact creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts and creatures you control. So this guy gets out of hand really fast. And just talked about Urza in a video recently where I think that commander's a little overrated. And man, did I have people blasting me in the comments about how fantastic it is to spit out that construct token every turn that just keeps making all the other ones bigger. Exact same as here, right? every single turn. Not hard to cast a creature or an artifact with this. And when you do, you're going to create another one of those gnome soldiers and another and another. Again, just a very easy way to help you close out the game. Fits extra good in certain strategies, right? That Urza deck I just mentioned, I'm sure it's a great fit there. Soldier Tribal, probably pretty good there. Any artifact creature tribal, token tribal. Again, this is another card that I'm going to have to definitely give consideration for my Benny Brax deck. Not like I don't have enough options there already. But any go-wide strategy, even just an artifact tribal deck, this is a great win con, I think. If you have a deck, I mean, if you got 8 artifacts in play, you're cranking out 8 tokens every time you make this, which of course are going to make everything else bigger. So yeah, this card's going to go in a lot of decks for sure. All right, Molten Collapse, the only multicolored card on this list, I believe. Black and a red sorcery. Choose one if you descended this turn. You may choose both instead. And of course, descend means you put a permanent card into your graveyard from anywhere this turn. And of course, that's really easy to do. Again, in particular strategies, just sacrifice a creature. If you're doing that, seems like a great fit. There is a lot of Rakdos sacrifice themes, obviously. If I'm discarding, a lot of Rakdos discard as well. I discard a permanent card. That is a permanent going to my graveyard from anywhere. That's gonna make sure that you do more than choose one. Or I just crack a fetch land. That's I crack my Evolving Wilds. That is a permanent going into my graveyard from anywhere. And what do I get for it? Well, I can destroy target creature or planeswalker, which of course is exactly what Dreadbore does. And of course, Dreadbore costs exactly this much and is a sorcery. So if you're still playing Dreadbore, and for me, that's very much on the edge whether or not I would find room for that in a Rakdos deck. Never mind if I have other colors. If you're playing that card, you're probably going to want to replace it with this because you get to choose both, which also is destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. So now I get that creature or planeswalker, but also I can destroy my opponent's Soul Ring as well, which seems pretty darn good. So this is just a strict upgrade from Dreadbore if you're still playing it. All right, let's talk about Progenitor's Icon, 3 mana artifact. And of course, I like to typically end off these videos with the colorless options that can go in the most decks because they're colorless. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, and don't let that pigeonhole you into this only being used in tribal decks. It absolutely is not. So it taps to add 1 mana of any color. So now we have a 3 mana rock that taps to add 1 mana of any color, which fits into this long list of Darksteel Inglet, maybe Coalition Relic, although that can get you more mana. Decanter of Endless Water, there's 1,000 of them. 3 mana rocks that tap to add 1 mana of any color and then give you some other ability, so it's easy to swap them out with the one that you want in there the most. This one, you can tap the next spell of the chosen type you cast this turn, can be cast as though it had flash. So very easy to shoehorn this in any tribal deck. However, I think this is a really easy way to just cast your commander with flash. And there are some commanders. I'll throw Jared Carthelian out there. That is a commander that I think you should cast with flash because, of course, you can't gain the monarchy the turn you cast it. So if you cast it on your opponent's turn, then you untap on your turn and you can immediately get the monarchy back, which is what you want, right? Here, I can just name human. Or, whatever your creature type for your commander is, you just name that. If it happens to help you out with any other creatures, okay, but this is just a really easy and colorless way to cast your commander with flash. Cosima, there's another one I'll throw out there. There's a commander you want to cast with flash because you don't want it to get removed before you get that upkeep trigger, right? I would put this in a Cosima deck, for sure. I think it's great in any strategy like that. And lastly, I'm going to talk about Metzalantli. I haven't had a lot of trouble pronouncing these names till now, so I guess I'm due. The Great Door, 3 mana, legendary artifact. So again, colorless card can go in any deck, which is great. Tap, draw a card, then discard a card. So you have a 3 mana card that comes down, you can immediately start looting with it. And, obviously any deck that wants draw triggers, for which there is a bunch whenever you draw a card, right? Any deck that has discard triggers, for which there is a bunch, and I have one myself, which I'm giving strong consideration for this card. Any of those decks, that can fit, but every deck wants to loot. I draw a card, again, it's a land, I don't need it, discard it and draw something else. Helps me get through my deck faster. Looting is always good in a commander game. Also though, pay 4 mana and tap transform Metzalantli, the Great Door, activate only if there are 4 more permanent types among cards in your graveyard. I don't think that's too difficult, right? I mean, we also have battles now adding to the whole permanent type thing. If you're using those, I'm not, but some people are. But artifact, land, creature, those aren't hard. Maybe enchantment, maybe planeswalker, not that hard to get there. Again, you're not going to do it right away anyway. You're probably going to wait till a little bit later. And when we've transformed this bad boy, it is again a legendary land, the core. Fathomless Descent. Tap, add X mana of any one color where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. Wowee. Listen, I'm going to compare this to Gaia's Cradle. This, in my opinion, is almost, not quite obviously, but it's getting close to being a colorless Gaia's Cradle. I know people are going to think I'm nuts for that. First of all, X is any color. It's not just green, which Gaia's Cradle is, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. I mean, obviously there are situations where I can put 1,000 Saproling tokens into play and tap for a bunch. There's always those situations with Gaia's Cradle, but I'll be honest, there are times when I cast a board wipe and my opponent's Gaia's Cradle's tapping for 0 mana, right? It actually is not good in certain situations. I know it's crazy to say that about Gaia's Cradle. The same is true here. Someone exiles your graveyard. It's not going to tap for anything. That sucks. But I think it is fair to say that this is a colorless option. It's not a colorless Gaia's Cradle, but it is comparable. It is very easy. If I can fill my graveyard, I'm going to be adding a ton of mana with this. If I'm discarding lots, if I'm, maybe in a theme where an artifact or heavy creature theme where I'm likely to have more permanents in my graveyard, I'm in a land theme where I'm sacking my lands, that's going to my graveyard. To me, I'm looking at this card and I'm thinking, everyone's going to want this, right? I mean, it's colorless and it could go in any deck and it's going to be great. I said that about Wandering Archaic and that card didn't go in every deck. And there was a lot of people that didn't really like it. And I was like, okay, so maybe I'm a little off by this. I don't know. This is certainly a toughie where it seems to be a card that a lot of people are going to throw in their decks. How many decks is it going in? You guys let me know in the comments below. All of these are the cards that to me jumped out at me right away. These are the ones where I'm like, oh man, everyone's going to be playing these cards. It's got to fit the theme of what you're doing. But for the most part, the cards that I specifically picked out in this video are the ones that can mostly go in any deck and they'll be good for you. I think any of these cards that I talked about here could be good in any commander deck. So for that reason, we're all going to be playing these cards, guaranteed, right? How popular are they going to be though? Only time will tell. Sometimes I'm wrong about these things. I will be making another video, so stay tuned for that. I'll be making a video talking about, I would say, more archetype specific cards. There's certainly a lot more cards from this set that are going to get played in the format, but they're more archetype specific. This list was more the stuff that's just generally good and stuff that are going to be commander staples going forward. So I will be making another video about the 99 cards, and I will also be making another video about the commanders from this set as well. Stay tuned for that. That is it for today though, and thanks for tuning in.